So, last time I did a bit of dissecting Stirner's preface or introduction to his book The Ego and Its Own, called All Things Are Nothing to Me. And I basically came to the conclusion that contrary to common conceptualizations of freedom, Stirner frames freedom not as an outward movement towards something bigger, some higher ideal, universal truth, or external goal, but as an inward claim over one's own desires, thoughts, and power. And he does so not just with his words, but also with his literary approach or his rhetorical method. If you're new here, I suggest watching that video before you watch this one, because I might get into some references. In this video, I'm going to work with Jacques Derrida's framework to think more about Stirner's framework of freedom, to explain how it actually has so much to add to contemporary resistance and liberation movement. But let me tell you first why I think it's so important. I'm sure you've heard of things like greenwashing or pinkwashing or rainbow washing. It's the practice of exploiting progressive values or social causes as marketing tools to appear more ethical or inclusive than one actually is. This often masks harmful practices beneath this facade of virtue. In Deleuzian terms, this practice is an example of how capitalist systems capture and re-territorialize lines of flight and take revolutionary forces like environmentalism, feminism, and LGBTQ+ advocacy and fold them back into the logic of commodification. It represents a process of co-opting transformative potentials which turns them into marketable identities or products, and thereby neutralizes their radical capacity to disrupt existing power structures. And, well, this pisses me off. I think it's incredibly important to actually pay attention to this mechanism if you want to call yourself an activist or a revolutionary or consider yourself part of a resistance movement. While political reactionaries are busy villainizing the opposing side as part of what I consider some kind of slave morality explosion in contemporary society, which takes up way too much public attention in my opinion, we're also doing absolutely nothing about the root of the problem, which would be to look deeply at capitalism and its control of desire. So what better lenses to use than Max Stirner's strictly egoistic radicalism and Jacques Derrida's deconstructive approach? I want to make this video to unravel how systems of power manipulate meaning and desire, and to show how incredibly useful Stirner's relentless critique of spooks and focus on ownness can be for anyone who seeks to resist the forces of capitalism that exist to control our desires. And this is deeply tied to the inward motion of freedom which Stirner expresses in his work. Stirner and Derrida both challenge us to see how freedom is neither an outward conquest of ideals nor a stable universal truth to achieve, but rather a continuous process of questioning, reclaiming, and resisting, and how this is the only way to truly resist becoming nothing but a servant to capitalism. So let's bring Jacques Derrida into the conversation. His work offers a powerful lens for understanding how these practices like greenwashing, pinkwashing, and rainbow washing operate not just on the level of economics or marketing, but also within the structures of language and meaning itself, which is something that Stirner actually did a long time before Derrida ever did it. But let's compare the two. Max Stirner and Jacques Derrida both offer critiques of the system that shape our lives, even if their focus differs. But overall, Stirner's concept of spooks and Derrida's method of deconstruction provide complementary lenses to examine how power operates, both within the individual and through the structures of language. In terms of core concepts, Stirner's spooks are abstract ideals like morality, religion, or collective causes that individuals internalize and allow to dominate their lives. These ideals masquerade as universal truths and ultimately demand obedience and conformity. Derrida's deconstruction focuses on exposing the inherent instability of meaning in language to find those spooks and to dismantle them. For instance, he uses binary oppositions in language to reveal how systems of thought rely on hierarchies like good and evil, male, female, and so forth, that seem fixed but are actually contingent and contradictory. But there is a difference in focus, and this part is important. Stirner's critique is personal and psychological, and it emphasizes the way spooks impose external authority over the individual. Derrida takes a more structural approach, and he examines how authority derives from language itself. So he critiques something he calls logocentrism, the belief in a transcendental signified, or a fixed point of meaning that legitimizes and organizes systems of thought. Derrida focuses deeply on identifying how language operates through what he calls différance, by constantly deferring meaning and creating the illusion of stability which systems of power exploit to reinforce their authority. So it seems that maybe the goals and methods differ while the theoretical framework is kind of the same. Stirner's goal is to achieve ownness, where individuals reclaim spooks as tools for their own benefit rather than submitting to them, and his method is a radical critique of ideals. And Derrida's aim is to destabilize fixed meanings and hierarchies to reveal how constructs like identity or morality are contingent and constructed. His method being deconstruction, or a close reading that exposes contradictions within text or concept. But what I think people tend to get wrong is why Stirner's focus and therefore his goals and methods are what they are. I personally believe that Stirner focuses on the personal and psychological as a radical act, which ensures that the mechanisms of control which Derrida sees in the paradox of language and power can't actually infiltrate the individual's mind and identity. I feel that Stirner actually goes one step further than poststructuralism in general by reminding us that if we don't watch out, these mechanisms of control will get to us. Essentially, Stirner does the same as Derrida without making a big deal out of it, to constantly remind us to stay aware and to focus on what we truly want. So what I want to do now is to read All Things Are Nothing to Me through the lens of Derrida's deconstruction to show how Stirner's approach to focus on ownness above all is actually the missing piece to the efforts of poststructuralism and postmodernism, especially in relation to activism and resistance movements. So, Max Stirner's The Ego in Its Own begins with this proclamation: all things are nothing to me. This radical opening serves as a manifesto for Stirner's rejection of external causes, universals, and fixed identities, and it kind of champions the ego as the creative nothing. To fully grasp this assertion, we have to examine how Stirner dismantles the spooks of universal causes, the paradox of the creative nothing, and the tension between individuality and language. So using Jacques Derrida's deconstruction, we can tease out the binaries, paradoxes, and political implications of Stirner's thought for contemporary resistance and activism. So let's have a look. Stirner's philosophy obliterates the binary of self and other, but not through simple negation. The ego he describes is neither an isolated essence nor a fixed identity. It's a relational process shaped by opposition to external causes or spooks, such as, quote, the good cause, God's cause, the cause of humanity, and so forth. So Stirner's ego is paradoxically tethered to these spooks because it gains definition only by rejecting them. So in this quote, he says, what is not supposed to be my concern? First and foremost, the good cause, then God's cause, the cause of mankind, of truth, of freedom, of humanity, of justice, further the cause of my people, my prince, my fatherland, finally even the cause of mind, and 1,000 other causes. Only my cause is never to be my concern. Shame on the egoist who thinks only of himself. Through Derrida's concept of différance, which is a perpetual deferral of meaning and relational interplay, we can see that the ego, as Stirner presents it, is always already shaped by what it opposes. So far from a static I, the ego is actually a dynamic flux or a trace of the spook it resists. It creates itself in opposition to them, but is never fully free from their shadow. So Stirner's ego doesn't inhabit a binary of self and other, but exists in the liminal space between them. It constantly redefines itself and refuses fixed categories imposed by external authorities. And this destabilization allows the ego to reject the tyranny of universal causes and claim freedom as a continuous process rather than a static ideal. Stirner's ego is described as the creative nothing, which is a term that is both perplexing and paradoxical. In this quote, he writes, "I am not nothing in the sense of emptiness, but I am the creative nothing, the nothing out of which I myself as creator create everything." So this creative nothing is not a void in the nihilistic sense, but a generative space which kind of brims with potential. Derrida would interpret this nothing as a refusal to be pinned down by any stable meaning, or a deferred presence where new possibilities constantly emerge. Stirner's ego exemplifies this dynamic. It doesn't negate the world, but it reshapes the world, and it asserts its own terms of engagement. For example, Stirner critiques the selflessness of those who devote themselves to spooks like the nation or humanity. And he writes, "The patriots fall in bloody battle or in the fight with hunger and want. What does the nation care for that? By the manure of their corpses, the nation comes to its bloom." So the creative nothing stands in stark contrast to this self-sacrificial devotion. While spooks demand self-negation for their perpetuation, the creative nothing actually affirms the ego's power to create its own world, free from imposed ideals. This paradoxical nothing is fertile ground for rebellion against oppressive structures because it resists being filled by anything other than what the ego actually wants. Stirner's rejection of universal causes is one of his most radical contributions, I would say. He exposes concepts like truth, freedom, and justice as spooks, which he sees as empty signifiers that demand devotion while serving only their own perpetuation. So in this quote, he says, "Look at the rest for yourselves. Do truth, freedom, humanity, justice desire anything else than that you grow enthusiastic and serve them?" Through Derrida's lens, these spooks function as transcendental signifieds, which anchor meaning within metaphysical hierarchies. But like Derrida's critique of metaphysics, Stirner reveals that these universals are iterable. They derive their power not from inherent truths, but from repetition. So each invocation of freedom or justice is a performance that masks their contingency and lack of substance. So Stirner's egoism dismantles these hierarchies by refusing to serve any cause that is not its own. The ego doesn't accept freedom or justice as pre-given values. Instead, it asserts its own meaning, which is unbound by external dictates. So this refusal to worship spooks is a form of deconstruction, and it undermines the ideological structures that sustain domination. Stirner's concept of the unique affirms individuality while rejecting universals. In this quote, he declares, "Nothing is more to me than myself." But this affirmation of uniqueness actually raises a critical question. Can the unique escape the system of language, which inherently relies on universality to articulate difference? Derrida might argue that the ego's claim to uniqueness is actually entangled with the very structures it seeks to transcend, as language is a system of differences that requires relationality. Stirner acknowledges this tension, but his solution lies in the perpetual motion of the ego. So the unique doesn't reject universality by stepping outside of it, it actually subverts it from within. This is shown in the following quote: "The divine is God's concern, the human man's. My concern is neither the divine nor the human, not the true, good, just, free, etc., but solely what is mine." So the ego navigates this tension by asserting its own terms and refusing to be defined by language's universal categories. This inward focus on freedom, like we talked about before, which is a freedom that belongs solely to the ego, provides a model for resisting domination in all of its forms. The unique is not a final destination, but a continuous process of self-creation, or an act of rebellion against the spooks that seek to constrain it. So the unique is not a final destination, but a continuous process of self-creation. In my opinion, Max Stirner's inward-oriented framework for freedom, which is embedded in his rhetorical approach as well as his choice of expression, actually offers a practical guide to resisting systems of domination and commodification. In the context of activism and resistance, his philosophy pushes us to recognize the spooks within our causes, so those ideals that masquerade as universal truths but often perpetuate the very structures they aim to dismantle. This inward turn doesn't imply passivity or solipsism, though. It actually represents a radical grounding of resistance within the self that is useful because, first and foremost, it maintains its untaintedness by external validation or commodified narratives. So what I did here is to look at Stirner through the lens of Jacques Derrida's Deconstruction, which generally helps identify the ways in which language and structures of meaning are co-opted by systems of power, which reveals the fragility and contingency of these systems, and in this case, it shows Stirner's unique approach to resist those very mechanisms. I also use this approach to show that the resistance practice of deconstructing language to expose mechanisms of control ends at exposing instability and leaves open the question of how one resists on a personal level, which is exactly where Stirner's emphasis on ownness, which ties to the reclamation of one's autonomy and desires, fills the gap and offers an actionable model for navigating the tension between individual uniqueness and structural forces. A key application of Stirner's philosophy is in recognizing the spooks that pervade contemporary activism. So, causes that align themselves with universal truths like justice or equality often actually unintentionally reinforce commodified identities or become absorbed into capitalist frameworks. For example, there's environmentalism, there's greenwashing, which is like this way of reframing ecological responsibility as a product to purchase, like sustainable goods, while actually obscuring systemic issues. Then there's feminism or LGBTQ plus advocacy, which is often referred to as pink washing in this realm, or rainbow washing, which use the aesthetics of liberation as a form of branding or neutralizing radical potential. Stirner's critique of spooks demands that activists deconstruct the ideals they serve, and it asks not what they fight for, but why and how they engage in resistance. So resistance becomes authentic when it's rooted in personal agency rather than the pursuit of abstract ideals. Stirner's inward focus doesn't reject collective action outright, but actually reorients it. So collective resistance becomes meaningful only when individuals approach it as unique, autonomous beings rather than as servants to the cause. And this shifts the goal from achieving a universal ideal to creating spaces where individuals can resist commodification in ways aligned with their ownness. So for example, instead of advocating for green consumerism, an egoist approach might encourage dismantling the systems of production and desire that drive overconsumption in the first place. And similarly, in feminist or queer activism, resisting the commodification of identities might involve rejecting performative allyship and creating subversive spaces that can't be easily absorbed into capitalist framework. Both Derrida and Stirner conceive of freedom as inherently dynamic. Derrida's difference reveals the impossibility of fixed meanings, while Stirner's creative nothing positions the ego as a site of perpetual becoming. And this dynamism is essential to resisting commodification, which thrives on fixed identities and repeatable narratives. So by treating freedom as a constant process of questioning and reclaiming, Stirner's egoism offers a way to resist reterritorialization of resistance movements. This contrasts with traditional notions of freedom as reaching a static or idealized state, which Stirner and Derrida both expose as spook. Stirner's concept of the unique challenges the commodification of identity. So unlike static categories of identity that can be marketed or exploited, the unique is unrepeatable and resistant to co-optation. Derrida's critique of language as inherently universal might suggest that asserting uniqueness is impossible without falling into systems of meaning, but Stirner circumvents this by showing that the unique asserts itself through language, not as a stable truth, but as an ongoing act of reclamation. And this act mirrors Derrida's deconstruction, but goes actually further by insisting on the primacy of the ego's lived experience as the foundation for resistance. So what am I trying to say here? I think essentially what I'm trying to say is that Stirner's language and rhetoric is not the juvenile gibberish it's often accused of being. Stirner has a deep sense of the importance of the inward focus to never forget, in Lacanian terms, that there is a deep lack that cannot be ignored. This lack is strong and powerful and will try its best to keep us trapped in the loop of the very system we seek to resist or feel victimized by. So if you really want to affect capitalism and its mechanisms of control, then what you need to do is look inward while resisting the external. One cannot be done without the other. And this is why Stirner is so important and useful to contemporary resistance efforts, in my opinion, because that is what's lacking. His philosophy is all about remembering the power of the fundamental aspect of domination, which is desire, and to realize that it operates through language, and that the best way to make people believe they are in control, when in fact they are not, is to make them believe that they are free. So what Stirner does is remind us that the freedom we are allowed to have is not real freedom. There can't be freedom in the external, which includes stuff like infrastructures, without having freedom in the internal, which includes the psyche and its internalizations. So no matter the infrastructures we're given and the chains that are removed from our bodies, metaphorically or not, freedom can be easily controlled by external forces through covert mechanisms which we don't even know are happening internally. So in Stirner's framework, inward freedom is a mechanism of subversion to combat the insidious nature of linguistic oppression. It's not an ideal of self-actualization, nor is it a breaking free. It's a continuous process of self-creation which keeps its focus on one's own desire. And this essentially has to be the foundation for all other action.